Good afternoon and welcome to The Briefing, a co-production of Now This and The Appeal. I'm Emily Galvin Almanza, and I'm so excited to be joined today by Congressmember Khanna and National Domestic Workers Alliance Director Ai-jen Poo, and of course, Councilmember Brad Lander from New York. Now, some 60 million essential workers are putting their lives on the line every day for us. They're putting their lives at risk and their families at risk to ensure our health, our safety, and our security during the coronavirus pandemic. They're delivering food, they're transporting healthcare workers, they're ensuring clean water, they're working across our healthcare system to protect us, they're caring for the elderly and critically ill, they're selling you groceries. So manufacturing workers, delivery workers, and other essential employees across the country are on the front lines and dying to keep our country going and to get food on our families' tables. So I think we can all agree that we want these folks to be both paid and protected for the incredible work they're doing. And yet, even as they save lives, nurses and medical workers and doctors are being fired or seeing pay cuts or working without essential protective equipment. Healthcare workers are dying in record numbers trying to help people during this pandemic, and they're still losing their jobs and their pay. So these essential workers have made sacrifices that the rest of us cannot and do not want to imagine. They've not only risked their own exposure, but their families as well. They've brought infections home. Kids have died. And despite recognizing our dependence on essential workers, both at the state and federal level, America's elected leadership, including the Trump administration and Congress, have failed to protect and adequately compensate essential workers, even while they bail out the cruise ships, the airlines, and big business. So we can and we must do better. As part of the next relief package, Congress must protect the health and well-being of essential workers and their families and give them compensation and job protections that we all agree they deserve, while we ask them to risk their lives and care for all of us. Today, we're going to be talking about what that looks like. We're going to be talking with Representative Khanna of California's 17th District about the Essential Workers Bill of Rights, legislation he recently proposed with the Senator Elizabeth Warren. And they want to create protections and economic opportunity for our nation's essential workers. And there's speculation that this bill could be part of the next stimulus package. We're also joined by Ai-jen Poo, Director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and co-director of Caring Across Generations, a 200-organization network transforming long-term care in the United States. She is a MacArthur Genius Grant recipient, and her work to protect essential workers has been critical to the momentum to keep this movement going. The Essential Workers Bill of Rights has been propelled by Ai-jen Poo's work. And of course, we have New York City Council member Brad Lander, who recently has been working to move a New York City Essential Workers Bill of Rights through the New York City Council, and it's modeled on Representative Khanna and Senator Warren's legislation. So, Representative Khanna, I would like to begin with you. I'm very excited to introduce you. You've been working with Senator Warren to pass this Essential Workers Bill of Rights. Can you talk us through what that legislation looks like, where it is in the process, and how likely it is to be in the stimulus package?
Well, Emily, thank you for convening us. I have a lot of admiration for Ai-jen's work and Councilmember Lander's work, so I'm looking forward to hearing from them as well. I've been working with Senator Elizabeth Warren to stand up for the dignity of all workers in our country. Everyone talks about how people are working remotely. The fact is there are 60 million Americans who are not working remotely, who are actually going and doing physical work, whether that's at warehouses, whether it's in grocery stores, whether it's as a truck driver, and they're fueling the entire economy. We wouldn't get Amazon packages if it weren't for them. We wouldn't get our groceries delivered if it weren't for them. We wouldn't have curbside pickup if it weren't for them. And all Senator Warren and I are saying is, first, these workers deserve safety. I mean, they shouldn't be going into workplaces where they are at increased risk of infection for themselves or their families. This is not just about basic decency. It's also keeping all of us safe. I mean, do you think we're safe if Amazon workers are getting COVID-19, or do you think that's going to ultimately transmit into the larger society? So it's about making sure that we're keeping them safe. It's about making sure that they get paid appropriately because of the risks they're taking. And it's about making sure that we're listening to them and that employers can't retaliate against them. There are other provisions I can get into, but this is just about common sense of the basics that we owe workers.
So I wanted to ask you, there's this new report out from the Justice Collaborative Institute in collaboration with Data for Progress. And it indicates that there is really broad public support for an essential workers' bill of rights and the policies that it includes. In fact, 3 out of 4 voters surveyed, and that was across party lines, want the bill. Can you comment on that bipartisan level of support and whether that's being sort of recognized in Congress and reflected in Congress for this legislation?
Well, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, deep down, we're a decent, kind country. I mean, people who get packages, who are seeing these workers, they want to make sure that they're taken care of. I mean, you have community leaders who've spoken out about this, faith leaders who've spoken out about this. It's the right thing to do. So why is there an obstacle? It's because of financial interest, moneyed interest, right? I mean, it's not people who are pushing against these rights. It's big corporations, big businesses who are concerned that they're going to have to spend more money, that this is going to come out of their bottom line. So here again, you see something which is an overwhelmingly popular policy, and the obstacle are the corporate lobbyists and the large corporate interests.
And do you think that stands a chance of preventing this from being part of the next stimulus bill?
I think it's a battle. I think that there are people who want to dilute it. There are people who want to take away provisions, even though on a broad basis, most Americans agree. Let's make sure if someone is doing essential work that they have health care. Let's make sure that they are safe. Let's make sure that they're paid appropriately. These are values we learn in kindergarten, that people should be treated fairly. And most Americans, Republican, Democrats, agree with it. But you have a concerted lobbying interest by businesses. I mean, Mitch McConnell is talking about giving everyone blanket immunity. So you have this concerted effort to prevent these basic rights from getting in.
So I'd like to turn to Ai-jen Poo, the National Domestic Workers Alliance Director, who's been fighting for and helped to jumpstart the essential workers' rights movement in the late 1990s. Ai-jen, can you sort of take a step back, take us back with you, tell us how we got here? Why are essential workers, including domestic workers, suffering? And how has the pandemic highlighted the unsustainability of the current system?
Emily, thanks so much for having me. And it's a real honor to be joined by the council member and the congressman who've just been providing such incredible leadership in this moment of crisis. To take a step back, if you think about work in this country, there were so millions and millions of American workers who are working incredibly hard and still not able to make ends meet. Working paycheck to paycheck. There was so much research before the crisis about the tens of millions of American workers who could not withstand a $400 emergency, right? And if you look at the sectors where essential workers are working, many of them are working in low-wage service jobs where it's essentially minimum wage work, and it's disproportionately done by women and women of color. It's low-wage service work without access to a safety net, without paid time off, without health care, without job security. So this workforce of essential workers coming into the coronavirus crisis was already incredibly insecure and vulnerable. And so now we have a situation where workers like home care workers that I represent are providing life-saving services, the only lifeline to some of the most vulnerable populations to the virus. Older people, people with disabilities, people with chronic illnesses. They are literally the only lifeline, bringing food, bringing medication, and keeping people from becoming completely isolated, keeping them safe, keeping them healthy. And they're having to do this work. Their average wages before the crisis, $16,000 per year, right? I can't even, there isn't a county or a city in this country where you can really survive, let alone raise a family on $16,000 per year. So when you're talking about stocking up on groceries or even figuring out transportation, I've heard caregivers who know how vital and life-saving the services that they provide are, and they're getting on the bus or public transportation, which has all reduced services because of the shutdowns. And so they're traveling 2, 3, 4 hours to get to a client. because they know how important their work is, but they don't have protective equipment, they don't have access to testing or treatment, and they have children, right? They have family members of their own who they're struggling to care for. Representative Khanna and I were on a town hall last week with a domestic worker named Maggie, who has to bring her son to care for the 94-year-old client that she supports and is the one lifeline for. And she's had a huge reduction in her other income. So she's basically running up credit card debt to survive. This cannot be how we treat workers who are saving our lives, protecting our loved ones, and keeping this country together.
Absolutely. Thank you for that example that really hits home. The details really bring the image home. Councilmember Lander, New York City is seeing a lot of these stories. It's obviously been incredibly heavily hit in this moment. What have you seen in terms of the effects of our failure to protect essential workers? What has that done to your city, and what are you going to do to change that?
Thank you so much. And it's also really just a great honor. Ijan's work, much of it got started here in New York City with domestic workers, well over a decade ago. And it's been inspiring to see how a set of folks that weren't organizing before have found voice and made real change. And that's just so critical these times. And obviously I'm a big fan of the congressman's. I'm honored to lead a thing called Local Progress, which is a national network of progressive city council and local elected officials. And we look to the Congressional Progressive Caucus and Representative Canada's leadership, and try to find a way to build across our lines of federal, state, and local, always working with folks who are organizing workers on the outside. So, every night in New York City right now at 7, we go out on our stoops or lean out our windows. It's probably the best moment of life in New York right now. It's like cheering for those workers in our nursing homes and ERs and grocery stores. But there's a really very painful irony to it. Sometimes down our block, we have this great block with banging pots and pans, we're cheering. And every so often, it's 7 o'clock. So we eat late in New York, a food delivery worker will be delivering food on the block on a bicycle, in a helmet and gloves. And everyone cheers extra for that worker because that's who we're cheering for. But that worker cannot take a paid day off if he or she is sick. And meanwhile, we're cheering for folks who don't have enough PPE at Amazon, they can't maybe hear us on Staten Island, but we lost a worker there this week, and in the hospitals as well. And then several workers who have spoken up about conditions have gotten fired by their hospital companies or by Amazon. And then one last irony is, because Representative Khanna and others fought for good unemployment insurance, which actually is paying people decently right now if they can get it, you got a lot of essential workers out there earning less than they would be earning if they were on unemployment insurance. So that is not treating people like they're essential. That is not giving them the dignity that comes from the cheering if they can't take a paid sick day, if they're fired for speaking out about protective equipment they don't have, and if they're not earning what they would be even if they're on unemployment. So the core idea that we were so inspired by in Congress and are working hard to do all the pieces we can in New York City, where we don't have to deal with Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump, so we can pass legislation at the local level that can be used, I hope, passed in other cities and states, and then help build the political force to get it passed in Congress as well.
So tell me a little bit more about your bill. How does your bill and the New York City version of the bill differ from the federal version, Representative Khanna's version of the bill?
Yeah, so really the differences are about what we can do at the local level, because there are a lot of things Congress can do that we can't. The federal government can print money, can do a whole series of things that we can't do. But there are a few things, and we can't even do what the state could do. Like one of the elements of the federal package would be to reclassify misclassified workers like Uber and Lyft drivers or DoorDash and Instacart delivery workers as employees. So they would get the benefits of workers' comp and health insurance. A lot of things we can't do at the local level. But one thing it turns out we can do is get those workers paid sick leave. Our paid sick leave bill in New York City was one of the first in the country. And my bill would extend its coverage beyond W-2 workers to misclassified independent contractors like DoorDash and Instacart and Uber and Lyft drivers, about 140,000 low-wage workers in New York City who would be given paid sick leave by our bill. Still want to see that for everyone across the country, but we could do that. And we also can provide some of those protections from unfair firing and whistleblower protections. There's a great way of doing that that's called just cause protections. Most American workers, if they're not lucky enough to be in a union, are at-will employees. And that means they can be fired at any moment without a reason or without even any notice. But we don't have to let that be the case. So I had been working already for the last year or two with fast food workers who helped develop a bill to say, you got to have a good reason to fire someone, and you have to like go through the steps and give them reason and give them notice. You can't just fire them on a moment's notice without any good cause. So we're now moving a bill that would require that for essential workers and say, you can't fire someone just on a whim. You got to have a good reason. And you know what? Speaking up honestly about health and safety conditions on the job, that is not a good reason to fire someone. You can't do it. So those are the two things that I think we can do at the local level that'll help build. We also have a bill that would involve premium pay, some sort of hazard pay. That's a lot harder to do without federal support because there's so many different elements, public and private and different workers. So I think that we're really hoping that the CARES 4 package will include, thanks to the leadership of Representative Khanna and Senator Warren. And obviously, if they get them all passed, great. But I think one thing we can start to do with that sick leave protections and with those just cause firing protections is show, it doesn't have to be this way. We did this wonderful town hall yesterday with a nurse on Staten Island and an Uber driver and a fast food worker, and the moral push that they're making. And I think the standing New York City has as the epicenter of the crisis, if we can take these steps forward, we hope it'll help build support for even more.
New York can stand as an example. I hope it will. I did want to sort of throw this question out to all three of you. We've talked a little bit about what these protections would do for workers themselves. And this is vital, right? The ability to take a paid sick day, the ability to speak up about inhumane and unsafe conditions without risking your job. Something better than applause at 7 o'clock, which is great, but we'd really like a paid sick day. I'd like each of you to speak, if you will, for a moment about the impact that protections like this have on the companies they impact and also on the economy at large. Aijen, can we start with you on that for the sort of movement view, and then we'll move to the legislators among us?
Well, sure. I mean, I think the first piece of this is that in order, we need to move from a crisis, eventually, right? A crisis response mode to a recovery and a rebuilding mode. And every essential worker is going to be so critical to our ability to recover collectively as a country, whether it's in healthcare workers or every single part of the low-wage service economy. When we talk about getting America back to work, essential workers is where we begin, right? And so for them to stay safe and to stay strong and to be able to be the anchors and pillars of recovery that we need them to be, I think the Bill of Rights is just the beginning of what's needed, really. And I do believe that it's the Essential Workers Bill of Rights at the federal level and what Councilmember Landers moving at the city level and what many other cities are starting to think about. These are all going to be building blocks to an effective and inclusive recovery that makes us more resilient, right? I think what we saw in this crisis is just how brittle and insufficient our safety net really is. And I think the safety net is going to be key to rebuilding and having a strong and thriving economy in the future, but also making us more resilient to crises that will inevitably come in the future. So this is the beginning, and all of these pieces are going to be critical building blocks. And it's about investing in the people, the workers who are going to make it all possible.
That's an eloquent, eloquent long view argument. Congressman Khanna, are arguments like that working with the special interests you talked about? Can you tell us how you are explaining the economic impact and the impact on companies to folks who oppose your bill? Oh, you're on mute. Let me see if we can unmute you, or if you could, there you go.
Ajahn is very eloquent. I would just say this, there's the short-term interests of corporations, and then there's the long-term interests. And for too long, our economy has been driven by short-termism, where companies are just looking to maximize immediate profits. That's not a good long-term strategy. And we need to remember corporations are the beneficiary of a lot of state grants, most namely limited liability. I mean, it's the state that gives that. So corporations have to have a stake in not just shareholders, not just their executives, but also workers. Let me give you a very concrete example. When Senator Sanders and I did the Stop Bezos Act, and we said, look, you got to pay workers $15 an hour. And if you're not going to do that, then you're going to be responsible for all of the assistance they're getting from government. The economist said, oh, you can't do that. Amazon, they can't pay $15. They're going to have robots do those jobs. They're going to automate those jobs. Let me tell you, Bezos in 3 weeks raised the wage to $15. Amazon's value went dramatically up. They're hiring more people. I don't think even Bezos would say that paying $15 was somehow bad economics. So sometimes it just takes a push. And I believe if they were to do these basic provisions, they'd have a healthier workforce. They'd have a more satisfied workforce, better morale, less chance of people getting sick. It's in the long-term interest of the companies to comply.
And I think it's worth noting, since you brought up Senator Sanders, he actually will be joining us here. Not me, he'll be joining Josie tonight at 7:15 on the briefing.
Wonderful.
So we'll be continuing this conversation. So Councilmember Lander, you're dealing with a different sort of environment in New York City, because there's a lot of small businesses. Instacart and Amazon are not those small businesses, but what sort of pushback are you seeing, and how do you answer that?
Yeah, we're happy to be the undercard, for Josie and Senator Sanders as well. So, but I think first, look, a lot of the job, there really is a question here. What kind of economy are we going to build? And is it going to involve an adequate social safety net and protections for workers or not? And we've been choosing no. So it's not magic that got that DoorDash or Instacart food delivery worker or Uber or Lyft driver unprotected. We allowed those companies over the last decade to grow a new business model. And they had a story that was about technology and venture capital, but really it was, you know what? It'd be great if you could run a business and not have to pay for your workers' sick leave or workers' comp or unemployment insurance or healthcare or retirement security. Lo and behold, you'd have less obligations. So let's call them independent contractors and offload all of our responsibilities. And we all let that happen. That wasn't like magic. We could have stepped in and said, no, those are workers. They have to be treated as workers with the protections that work deserves. And we didn't get that done in New York City, where we could have, or at New York State, or at the federal government. And so now we have millions of workers who are really employees, but are treated as independent contractors. And we don't have to let that keep going. It shouldn't have taken us a pandemic to see that won't work, but it won't work. So we need an economy where work is valued. And if you're going to build a company, you have a set of responsibilities. And boy, Amazon wanted to come to New York City and get $3 billion of tax breaks. And lo and behold, we heard on Monday, as part of our effort, from Marina Cummings, who works 3 12-hour shifts a week on Staten Island in that same facility that Chris Smalls was fired from and where the first worker died this week. And she was just real clear, we're people, we're not robots. And if Amazon wants to benefit from all the things that we do in this country that make it possible for them to profit, then they have to be part of an economy that respects its workers and allows them to survive, to live at all, and to have enough dignity. So we need different policies for our small businesses, that's for sure. And I think the fact that the Paycheck Protection Program has been so difficult for any small businesses, much less immigrant entrepreneurs or people of color, folks who don't bank with traditional banking institutions, to get the resources is another really big problem. But sure, one of the ways, and Congressman Khanna spoke to this, that the business community, we had a hearing on our bills on Tuesday. And so it wasn't Amazon or Uber that showed up to speak against it. They have a coalition. And so small business people come and say, don't impose any more regulations on us. We're really hurting. So we have to be thoughtful. There's lots of ways to support small businesses, but those don't involve the right to fire people with no reason or not give people paid sick leave. Most small businesses treat their workers decently anyway, but they can follow a set of rules, and we can have a set of policies that make sure that those larger companies that are really on the cutting edge of shredding the social safety net can't do.
So if we're thinking about this sort of crisis moment as a moment in which we build something smart, several of you have mentioned building something smart that will be a reaction to momentary crisis and also last longer into the future and be an advancement for workers' rights more generally. Can each of you talk for a moment about, and I really mean a moment because we have to wrap up in a couple minutes to let everyone go, but how this bridges into the next steps in terms of protecting American workers and what you see as necessary to get to that next step. Let's start with Aijen, and then we'll go to Councilmember Lander, and then we'll close with the Congressman.
I think we have all the ingredients we need. We have the public support, and we have new public awareness about just how essential so many segments of the economy that have been invisible really are. We've got an Essential Workers Bill of Rights at the federal level. We've got one in New York City. Let's move those forward, and may they be the groundwork for the safety net that we so deserve in this country for every single worker.
I think we'll hear that you have to make a choice between like pro-business or pro-growth policies that help us get past this and move back and restore our economy versus an economy built on dignity and equity and sustainability. And it's just a false choice. The economy works when prosperity is more broadly shared, when people aren't afraid they're going to be evicted next month, when they know they have some basic stability. We do need to think about growth and restoring our economy, but we absolutely can do it in a way that respects workers and spreads that prosperity more broadly than we have been.
I appreciate that point by Councilmember Lander. I completely agree that an economy that has equity and dignity is also an economy that is pro-growth and that's actually going to lead to more prosperity. And I want to thank Aijen, who's been fighting this battle for decades. In my district in Silicon Valley, people think of Apple and Google. They forget that they're bus drivers and janitors and food service workers who make the glue of the ecosystem work. And for decades, frankly, Silicon Valley Rising and others have been fighting for justice and equity for them. What has changed is suddenly we've all realized that we're not all remote workers. I think there was this view that we're in a digital age and everything is online. And suddenly we realized, no, there are all these people who are doing all these jobs who we didn't notice in the past. We may not have taken the time to say hello or ask about their families, but they're actually really essential. And I think this has been a wake-up call for the country. And the question is, like anything else, is this going to be a few months and then we're going to go back to our lives? Or have our eyes really been awakened to an injustice? And are we going to do better? I am optimistic that we are going to do better. We're going to rise to the occasion because we finally realized how much value these workers are providing.
I can't think of a better place to close than by noting the degree to which this has changed our value structure and the degree to which we've recognized that the most important folks around us may be those who keep us alive and fed and functioning, the glue of society, as you put it. So I want to close by thanking each of our guests so much. I'm so happy for our audience that they had a chance to hear from you about this incredibly vital issue. And I also want to close this episode by thanking the essential workers who are in fact out there making everything down to this Zoom show possible. So we hope you'll join us tonight at 7:15 with Senator Sanders. Thank you to each of our guests. I'm Emily Galvan Almanza, and I will see you all on Monday.